Tom.
And we are VIMTV, Velocities in Music, the best kept secret in music reviews. Today, we're going to review an album by a folk artist named Sam Amidon, which sounds like a dinosaur. Tom pointed this out to me.
Sam Amidon.
Sam Amidon! In his album, the dinosaur album, Bright Sunny South. As I said, this is a folk artist who really has kind of an iconic sound. And I would attribute that to two things. One, he uses banjo, which is always a good start for a folk/bluegrass or a country artist. That's always something that gives me some more organic feel to the sound. Sure. And then also his approach to vocals. Now, Tom, I know you have a lot to say about this guy's approach to his sound. And it's one that I think, from listening to the music that I've heard you write, that you can kind of relate from how he approaches writing songs from a songwriting perspective. He, considering the fact that he does a lot of things where he's changing the structure of the sound, has a lot of big freakouts in the end and stuff.
Yeah, it's a really cool approach. At first, I'll be honest, I actually didn't like this album as much at first, mostly because the vocals were a little off-putting to me.
They were.
And I think that's because that's one of the first things you hear in this album, his vocals. And they have this kind of cute, naive sound to them. And at first that bothered me, but I ended up really liking it because I think it adds a nice authenticity to the sound. It gives it a charm that I think is indicative of the style that he's pulling from, which is very early 1900s, just roots, bluegrass, and folk.
You're in a saloon, and he's singing to you.
Exactly. And it's got that songwriting style of those old, 45s and albums that by artists that never even put out a record. You just kind of, or a full album, that is. They just recorded some singles here and there, and I think that it's a part of American culture that's very cool, and it's cool to see it coming back. I mean, this is obviously produced in a much more modern, kind of sharp way, but his songwriting style pulls from that. Now, he's blending it with some more modern things as well, because he throws in some kind of subtle layers underneath.
He does.
Some very light electronic stuff at times. It's definitely not an overbearing or really even prevalent part of this album, but there are some drums, electric guitars at times, but they're used very sparingly. And that's something I really appreciated about this album, is that I like that he didn't play all his cards right from the get-go. Right when I thought that I knew what this album was all about, there were little surprises like that, like in tracks 4 and 5, My Old Friend and He's Taken My Feet. He's Taken My Feet has this section at the end with just this abrasive electric guitar and big pounding drums, which is the last thing that I expected by that point of the album. There's some soft horn layers and things like that too. So he's definitely got his ear set to the entire arrangement and scope of any given moment or song on the album. But at the same time, it's balanced with a lot of just very soft, very kind of subtle and quiet, endearing moments.
Right. That's a really good point as far as not playing his cards right in the first few tracks. He really eases you into this false sense of security and then kind of changes the direction he's taking the album, which is an interesting approach to crafting an album listen. So as this thing kind of progresses and then expands, and then you get this change in sound that's actually much more expansive and loud and brings in some new dynamics, literal dynamics. He's yelling at you at one point. And actually one of my favorite tracks on here, track 7, As I Roved Out, and you picked that as well, Tom, is his vocals are just more aggressive. He's got this gruff to him. He's yelling. I mean,
it's a style that you don't hear at all in the first 6 tracks.
Right, and honestly, that just hit me right between the eyes as just being like, this is the quintessential song on this album. It's what, if I'm going to take away one track from this album, it's this, because that's where I think he makes his thesis statement. Now that's track 7. There's 4 tracks after that. What do you do with that? I think that's it. I think that when you're an artist and you're crafting an album listen, which is sort of becoming a lost art, unfortunately, but I think that as you're doing this, since this is still the format you're releasing in, you have to pay attention to the album flow. And I feel like the one criticism I have of this album is the last 4 tracks. Certainly, Shake It Off, track 8, Groundhog, track 9. I mean, that's 2.5 minutes.
Totally.
I mean, the last 4 tracks encompass about 9 to 11 minutes worth of material, but none of it is of high quality. There's some neat musical ideas, but I don't think any of them are developed to the point that you see the first 7 tracks. Whether I like them or not was irrelevant. They are all well-developed musical ideas, and it's just the last before didn't seem to be quite as well developed. Now that's something that I would want to have seen addressed if I was going to give this like a must-listen recommendation.
Yeah.
Which I'll just come out and say I'm not going to. Now what I would say is that I would have liked to have seen more aggressiveness in his vocals, like on track 7, more times throughout the album. I think that that's something he could have done to add a layer of emotion to every track, not just select few.
It's a tough balance because you want to use some things like that sparingly so it doesn't become a gimmick.
Right.
But at the same time, if it's something that sounds really good and you only use it once, the listener's always going to be left wondering, why didn't you throw that in at least just even 1 or 2 more tracks?
That's why Tom talks a lot in most of our music reviews, is because if he just said one thing, you know, you guys would be left with just me, and that would not be fun for you. So, I mean, it's the same, really, it's the same concept, right?
You gotta have that balance.
Right,
I mean,
it's all about balance.
I appreciate and respect the tact, but I think he's also got to realize his strengths, and if those strengths shine through in those rare moments, then what are you left with most of the time? You're left with kind of his average, middle-of-the-road output, which I still think this album was good overall, but there were moments where I was definitely left wanting more, especially after you can see some of the things that he can really do. I would love to see him get a little more ambitious and really push his sound forward, but keep those charming aspects of his presentation and his songwriting, because there's a lot of it there.
Right, I totally agree, and really overall, I felt that like he could have focused this a bit more. And the other thing is that this is a short album. I mean, the content that you have here, it's not a lot to take in, right? You have a lot of cool musical ideas, some more fleshed out than others, but at the same time, if I'm only resonating with some of the bigger tracks, some of the more aggressive tracks, both structurally and dynamically, at the same time, it's a short album. There's other tracks there which encompasses a large percentage of the album that I'm not resonating with, and that therefore pushes my score down a little bit. I still thought that this was a really good album. This guy has a great, unique style. It's fresh. I really want to hear more from Sam Amidon. And it's just that Bright Sunny South didn't totally sell me. Still like it. Still going to come back to it. I'm going to go 71 on this.
I'm going 75.
So we're in the mid to lower 70s.
Yeah.
And I think that that's a really good representation of an album that's worth checking out, but not something that, we're going to give a must-listen recommendation. So if you have a bunch of things on your plate, not something you necessarily need to go check out, unless you're really into eclectic folk and Americana music, which this clearly falls in that genre category. If you've heard of Sam Amidon or have listened to Bright Sunny South, we'd love to get your feedback on, even if you haven't, we'd still love to get your feedback on Velocities in Music or the music you're listening to. So please leave us a comment at www.velocitiesinmusic.com or our YouTube channel. Also follow us on Twitter and like us on Facebook. That's where we do a lot of the talking with you guys, our fans, and we get a lot of feedback from you about the albums you're into right now that you'd like to see us review. I'm Jake.
I'm Tom.
And we are VIMTV, moving music critique forward.
It was the least that I could do to tell the world that you were here. The love and the light.